stepping into that loop, that addictive loop of the negative thoughts?
So every time you have a thought, you make a chemical. And if you have a happy thought or think of something happy, you turn on a set of neurological networks in your brain that fire in a sequence, a pattern, a combination that signals another part of the brain. The brain makes another chemical that's a chemical messenger that makes you feel a certain way as you secrete a certain hormone. Okay, the moment you start to feel happy, the moment you start to feel joyful, your brain is checking in with your body saying, Chris, you're feeling pretty joyful. And so then the chemistry influences you to think more wonderful thoughts. And so the cycle of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking creates what we call a state of being, okay? But you could have thoughts that make you feel guilty, and you can turn on a different set of circuits in your brain that signal a different batch of neuropeptides, that signal a different hormonal center to make you feel differently. The moment you feel miserable, the moment you feel victimized, the moment you feel suffering, the moment you feel pain, and you can't think greater than how you feel, the brain's checking in with the body and saying you're really miserable, and it generates more corresponding thoughts equal to that feeling. So it's thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking. This loop of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking creates a state of being. And again, the thought and the feeling, the image and the emotion, the stimulus and response is making the body become conditioned subconsciously into the past. And so now the person has to feel that same emotion to reaffirm their identity. So that becomes their state of being. And now they behave as if they're in their past, and they think as if they're in their past.
What ways do our memories lie to us?
Wow. Well, everybody has a story, right? And the way we make memories is from emotions. So if you have an event in your life that's highly traumatic, just as an example, the moment you perceive that event in your life through your senses, the chemical information that's coming back as information to your body is telling you to be altered. So once you begin to change your internal state, the greater the change in your internal state from its normal continuity, the more the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot. And that's called the long-term memory. So then the person thinks neurologically within the circuitry of that experience, and they feel within the boundaries of the emotions of that experience. Every time they review the event in their mind, they're producing the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event was occurring. So again, the body's reliving the trauma 50 to 100 times in the day, and now the trauma is no longer in the brain. The trauma is emotionally conditioned in the body, right? So if you say to the person, why are you so bitter? Why are you so sad? Why are you so unhappy? They'll say, I am this way because of this event that happened to me 10 years ago. Which what they're really saying is, after that event, I changed and I have not been able to change since this event. Well, the research on memory says that if you ask that person that story of the actual account, 50% of that story is no longer the truth. In other words, they're embellishing the story so they can excuse themselves. They're making it worse. They're making the conditions worse. They're telling the story and they're embellishing it to some degree to excuse themselves from changing, right? So if 50% of that story isn't even the truth, they're reliving a miserable life they never even had, all to reaffirm their addiction to that emotional state. So here's the crazy part, because we work with veterans and Navy SEALs, and can you then forget about the memory and just overcome the emotion? Because the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. And now you no longer belong to the past. You're ready to create a new future. And so the stories we tell about our past are only stories we tell when we feel those emotions. We would never tell that story when we feel a different emotion.
Why?
Because the person's feeling that emotion, and that emotion is the record of the memory chemically. So they're telling the story because they can't think greater than that feeling. Feelings have become the means of thinking. But what if you told a different story? And that's exactly what we teach people to do. Stop romancing your past. Start romancing your future. Stop telling the story of your past. Start telling the story of your future. Stop believing in your past. Start believing in a future. And that process is an unlearning and a relearning process. It's literally breaking the habit of being yourself and reinventing a new self. It's pruning synaptic connections. It's sprouting new connections. It's unfiring. It's unwiring. It's refiring. It's rewiring. It's deprogramming. It's reprogramming. It's losing your mind and creating a new one. It's unmemorizing emotions that are stored in the body and then reconditioning the body to a new mind and to a new emotion. And so what happens in this immersive experience when we do our week-long events is we take the person right to that point of that emotion where they say, I got to go. This is too uncomfortable. And we don't want them to white knuckle it there. We give them something to do. And if they practice that formula and they keep lowering the volume to that emotion, sooner or later, the body becomes liberated. They're stepping out into the unknown. And we've seen people who have had the most brutal, the most horrific, the most difficult paths, look back at their past and say, I would never want to change one thing in my past because it got me to this moment. And that's the moment the past no longer exists. They look at their betrayers, they look at their abusers, and they see the purposeful good and the meaning behind all of that had to happen because it would have never brought them to this moment. And I think that's the moment the past no longer exists.